The whispers stung harder than the summer heat as Harriet Morgan stood frozen in the center of Redemption Springs' dusty Main Street, her finest dress splattered with mud and whiskey. Moments earlier, she'd been walking with her head held high past the saloon when Wallace Bentley, the banker's intoxicated son, had stumbled into her path, spilling his drink and falling against her, sending them both tumbling into the street's only mud puddle after weeks without rain. "Looks like the schoolmarms finally found her proper place wallowing in the dirt," Wallace had jeered, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear as he staggered to his feet, leaving her sprawled in the muck. Now, in May of 1878, Harriet's carefully constructed reputation in this frontier town lay as ruined as her dress. 2 years of maintaining perfect composure as the town's only teacher, 2 years of ignoring whispers about being 26 and unmarried, 2 years of proving herself worthy of respect all undone in a moment of public humiliation. "Are you just going to sit there all day, Miss Morgan?" Wallace sneered, the afternoon sun glinting off his expensive watch chain. "Or are you waiting for someone to carry you home like a proper lady?" Tears threatened, but Harriet refused to give them the satisfaction. With as much dignity as she could muster, she attempted to stand, only to slip again as her mud-caked boots found no purchase on the slick ground. The crowd's laughter swelled. "That's enough." The voice cut through the jeers like a knife. The crowd parted as a tall figure approached a man Harriet had seen around town but never spoken to. Garrett Hayes, the rancher who'd purchased the troubled Cross Creek property last winter. Unlike the spectators in their town finery, he wore simple working clothes, a faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and well-worn boots. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, was weathered from years under the sun. Wallace straightened, suddenly finding his balance. "Mind your business, Hayes. This doesn't concern you." Garrett ignored him completely. Instead, he removed his leather duster and approached Harriet, kneeling beside her without concern for the mud seeping into his clothes. "Madam," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "would you allow me to assist you?" Harriet hesitated, mortification making her throat tight. But something in his steady green eyes, not pity, but simple human kindness, made her nod. With unexpected gentleness, he draped his coat around her shoulders and helped her to her feet. The duster enveloped her, hiding the worst of the damage to her dress while providing a strange sense of protection. "I believe you owe the lady an apology," Garrett said, turning to Wallace, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel. Wallace scoffed. "For what? She should watch where she's walking." Garrett stepped forward, his movement unhurried but purposeful. "Strange. I saw the whole thing from across the street. Seemed to me like you were the one who couldn't walk a straight line." The crowd's mood shifted, several onlookers murmuring in agreement. Wallace's face reddened. "You calling me a liar, Cowboy?" "I'm calling you drunk and discourteous," Garrett replied evenly. "And I'm suggesting you apologize to Miss Morgan before you embarrass yourself further." For a moment, it seemed Wallace might throw a punch. But something in Garrett's steady gaze, perhaps the quiet confidence of a man who had faced far worse than a banker's entitled son, made him reconsider. "Sorry about your dress," Wallace muttered insincerely before turning away, heading back toward the saloon. Garrett watched him go, then turned back to Harriet. "My wagon's just down the street. May I offer you a ride home, Miss Morgan?" Harriet became aware of the stares still directed their way. "I can manage, Mr. Hayes. You've already been too kind. It's no trouble. And frankly," he added, lowering his voice, "it might give these fine townspeople something else to talk about besides your misfortune." He had a point. And the thought of walking the 6 blocks to her small house on the edge of town, mud dripping with every step, was unbearable. "Thank you," she said quietly. As they walked to his wagon, Garrett kept a respectful distance while remaining close enough to assist if needed. Not a word was spoken about her disheveled appearance or the whispers that followed them. At the wagon, he helped her up to the bench seat with the same careful consideration, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Where to, Miss Morgan?" "Juniper Lane, the small white house at the end." He clicked his tongue and the horses started forward. As they pulled away from the crowd, Harriet felt something inside her crumble. The calm she'd maintained shattered, and though she tried to hide it, a tear escaped down her cheek. "Don't give them the satisfaction," Garrett said quietly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm not crying about them," Harriet lied, hastily wiping the tear away. "It's just my dress. It was my mother's." Garrett nodded, accepting her explanation without question. "My sister knows a thing or two about removing stains. I could ask her advice if you'd like." The simple offer of help without judgment or expectation loosened something in Harriet's chest. "I would appreciate that." They rode in silence for a moment before Harriet found her voice again. "You're the one who bought the Cross Creek property, aren't you?" "That's right." "People said you were foolish, that the land was played out." A faint smile touched his lips. "People say a lot of things, doesn't make them true. Is it working out for you?" she asked, genuinely curious. "It's hard work," he admitted. "The previous owner let things go, but the land's good. Just needed someone willing to see its potential." As they turned onto Juniper Lane, Harriet studied him from the corner of her eye. Garrett Hayes was not what she'd expected. He wasn't like the rough cowboys who came to town looking for trouble, nor like the businessmen who saw the frontier as merely an opportunity for profit. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that didn't require display. "Here we are," he said as they pulled up to her modest white house. The small yard was neat, with a vegetable garden to one side and wildflowers growing along the path to the door, evidence of a woman who made the best of what she had. He helped her down from the wagon, still treating her with the dignity that had been stripped from her in town. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Harriet said, starting to remove his duster. "Keep it for now," he said. "You can return it when it's convenient." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have it cleaned and brought to you. No rush." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good day, Miss Morgan." As he turned to leave, Harriet found herself reluctant to end the encounter. "Mr. Hayes," he paused, looking back at her. "Why did you help me?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Because it was the right thing to do." With that simple answer, he climbed back into his wagon and drove away, leaving Harriet standing on her porch, clutching his duster around her shoulders and wondering why, despite everything, she suddenly felt lighter than she had in months. Inside her small house, Harriet methodically removed her ruined dress, fighting back fresh tears as she examined the damage. The pale blue fabric, once her mother's pride, was now stained beyond salvation. She soaked it in cold water and scrubbed until her fingers were raw, but the worst marks refused to budge. As dusk settled over Redemption Springs, Harriet sat on her porch swing, wrapped in a faded quilt despite the mild evening. Garrett Hayes' duster hung inside, cleaned and pressed. She would return it tomorrow, she decided. It would be the proper thing to do. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Harriet woke before dawn, as was her habit, and prepared for the school day with mechanical precision. But as she approached the schoolhouse, she spotted several of her students huddled near the door, whispering and giggling. They fell silent as she approached. "Good morning," she said firmly, unlocking the door with steady hands. "Morning, Miss Morgan," they mumbled, exchanging glances that told her yesterday's humiliation had already become schoolyard gossip. Inside, she found a crude drawing on her blackboard, a figure face down in mud with exaggerated curls like her own. Harriet erased it quickly before the other children arrived, her cheeks burning with fresh humiliation. The day dragged endlessly. Though most of her 27 students behaved normally, she caught whispers and stifled giggles. Twice she had to reprimand Wallace Bentley's younger brother for passing notes. By the time she dismissed class, her nerves were frayed thin. As the children scattered into the afternoon sunshine, Harriet remained at her desk, sorting through assignments and delaying her walk through town. The schoolhouse stood on the main street, which meant she would have to pass the general store, the bank, and worst of all, the saloon where Wallace Bentley had emerged yesterday. When she could delay no longer, Harriet gathered her things and Mr. Hayes' folded duster. Perhaps she could take the back streets to avoid the busiest parts of town on her way to Cross Creek Ranch. She had just locked the schoolhouse door when a wagon pulled up beside her. Garrett Hayes sat at the reins, his expression as calm as it had been yesterday. "Afternoon, Miss Morgan," he said, tipping his hat. "I was in town for supplies and thought I might save you a trip. My sister had some advice about your dress." Harriet blinked in surprise. "Mr. Hayes, you didn't need to trouble yourself." "No trouble, I needed to come to town anyway." He gestured to the wagon bed behind him, loaded with sacks of feed and other supplies. She hesitated, then stepped forward, offering his duster. "I wanted to return this and thank you properly for your kindness yesterday." He took it with a nod. "How was your day?" The simple question, asked with genuine interest, nearly undid her. Harriet glanced toward the schoolhouse where the crude drawing had been. It was challenging. Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words because understanding flickered in his eyes. "People have short memories in these parts," he said. "They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." "I hope you're right." She straightened her shoulders. "Your sister's advice about the dress," she said, to try a mixture of salt, lemon juice, and sunshine. "Apparently it works wonders on mud stains." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paper package. "She sent this. It's her special mixture for stubborn stains." Harriet accepted the package, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Please thank her for me." "You could thank her yourself," he said, surprising her. "We're having a small gathering at the ranch this Sunday after church. Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors sharing a meal. You'd be welcome to join us." The invitation caught her off guard. In her 2 years in Redemption Springs, Harriet had been included in town functions as the schoolteacher, but rarely invited to private homes for social occasions. Her status as an unmarried woman of a certain age made her an awkward addition to family gatherings. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose," she said automatically. "It's no imposition. Hannah, my sister, specifically asked me to invite you. She's new to these parts and hasn't had much chance to make acquaintances, especially female ones. Put that way, refusing would seem unkind." And the thought of spending Sunday afternoon somewhere other than her empty house held undeniable appeal. "Then I would be delighted," Harriet said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Good." He seemed genuinely pleased. "Service ends at noon. I could pick you up afterward if that suits." "That would be fine, thank you." As he prepared to leave, Garrett hesitated. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice lower, "don't let yesterday change who you are. This town is better for having you in it, whether they realize it or not." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat again and drove away, leaving Harriet standing on the schoolhouse steps with the package in her hands and an unexpected warmth in her chest. That Sunday, Harriet dressed with particular care. Her wardrobe was limited. A schoolteacher's salary didn't allow for extravagance, but she had managed to salvage her blue dress using Hannah Hayes' remedy. The worst stains had faded to barely noticeable shadows, and she had cleverly added a panel of complementary fabric to hide the most damaged section. As promised, Garrett arrived shortly after church ended. Harriet had attended the service as usual, enduring the curious glances and whispers with her head held high. She had noticed Garrett and a woman she assumed was his sister sitting several pews ahead, but they had left quickly after the benediction. "You look lovely, Miss Morgan," Garrett said as he helped her into the wagon. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and the closest thing to a formal coat that a rancher might own. It suited him better than she would have expected. "Thank you. And please call me Harriet. It seems appropriate if I'm to be a guest in your home." "Harriet, then," he agreed, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "And I'm Garrett." The drive to Cross Creek Ranch took them out of town and across rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view in the valley below a modest but well-maintained house, a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings, all surrounded by good grazing land with a creek winding through it. "It's beautiful," Harriet said honestly. "It's getting there," Garrett replied, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "Previous owner let it go to seed. We've been working since winter to bring it back. We, my sister Hannah and I, and my foreman, Luis Rodriguez, and his family, they live in the smaller house beyond the barn." He pointed to a cottage partially hidden by trees. Lewis worked this land under the previous owner. He knows it better than anyone. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall and straight-backed like her brother, with the same sandy hair, though hers was pulled back in a practical bun. "There's Hannah now," Garrett said, a note of affection warming his voice. Hannah Hayes waved as they pulled up, coming down the steps to meet them. Up close, Harriet could see that she was perhaps a few years younger than herself, with the same steady green eyes as her brother. "You must be Miss Morgan," Hannah said, extending her hand. "I'm so pleased you could join us." "Harriet, please," she replied, taking the offered hand and finding the grip firm and confident. "And thank you for the stain remedy. It worked wonderfully." Hannah smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. "I'm glad. It's an old family recipe. Our mother swore by it." "Come inside," Garrett said, offering Harriet his arm. "The others should be arriving soon." The Hayes home was modest but comfortable, with sturdy furniture, clean floors, and simple decorations that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. What struck Harriet most was the feeling of welcome windows open to the spring breeze, fresh wildflowers on the table, and the aroma of home cooking filling the air. "It smells wonderful," Harriet said as Hannah led her to the kitchen. "Just a simple beef roast with vegetables from our garden," Hannah replied. "Nothing fancy, but there's plenty of it. Garrett always says good food tastes better when shared." Soon the house filled with the other guests: Luis Rodriguez, his wife Alina, and their teenage son Miguel. An elderly couple named the Wilsons who owned the neighboring ranch, and to Harriet's surprise, Dr. James Fuller from town and his young daughter Sophia. Conversation flowed easily around the large dining table. Unlike the stilted social gatherings in town, where people carefully watched their words and ranked each other by wealth and position, this was a meal among equals. Dr. Fuller discussed his hopes for a proper hospital someday. The Wilsons talked about the unusual spring weather and its effect on the grass. Lewis and Garrett debated cattle breeding techniques, while Alina shared recipes with Hannah. Harriet found herself seated between Garrett and young Miguel, who eagerly told her about the books he was reading, far beyond what she would have expected from a boy his age. "Miss Morgan is the best teacher in the territory," Garrett told the table when Miguel mentioned his interest in continuing his education. "The children in town are fortunate to have her." "Not all their parents feel that way," Harriet said before she could stop herself. A brief silence fell over the table. "Some people lack the wisdom to recognize value when it's right in front of them," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "My Henry always said you could judge a community by how it treats its teachers and preachers." "Hear, hear, Doctor." Fuller agreed, raising his water glass in a small toast. "To those who bring knowledge and faith to the frontier." The conversation moved on, but Harriet noticed Garrett watching her with quiet attention for the rest of the meal. It wasn't the evaluating gaze she was accustomed to from men in town, not measuring her worth as a potential wife or judging her failings as a woman alone. There was something else in his eyes, something that made her both uncomfortable and strangely hopeful. After the meal, while the men moved to the porch to smoke pipes and discuss ranch business, Hannah invited Harriet to help her with dessert. "I hope you don't mind me saying so," Hannah said as they sliced apple pie in the kitchen, "but my brother has mentioned you several times since he helped you the other day." Harriet nearly dropped her knife. "Has he?" Hannah smiled. "Garrett doesn't talk much, as you might have noticed. So when he mentions someone more than once, I take notice. I'm sure he was just concerned after the incident, perhaps." Hannah arranged pie slices on plates with practiced efficiency, or perhaps he recognizes a kindred spirit. Someone who understands what it means to face this frontier on your own terms. Before Harriet could ask what she meant, Hannah changed the subject. "Will you be staying in Redemption Springs long? I understand teaching positions tend to be temporary for women." "Until they marry, you mean," Harriet said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. "I've been here 2 years already. I have no plans to leave." "Good," Hannah said firmly. "The West needs more women who stand their ground." As Harriet helped carry dessert to the dining room, she wondered about the Hayes siblings. There was a story there, something that had brought them to this remote ranch, something that had given them both that look of quiet determination. The afternoon passed pleasantly, and all too soon it was time to return to town. As Garrett helped Harriet into the wagon, Hannah pressed a jar of preserves into her hands. "Peach," she said, "from our first harvest last fall, please come again, Harriet. It's been a genuine pleasure." The ride back was quiet at first, both Harriet and Garrett seemingly lost in thought as the setting sun painted the grasslands in gold and amber. Finally, Garrett broke the silence. "Thank you for coming today. It meant a lot to Hannah." "I enjoyed myself more than I have in a long time," Harriet admitted. "Your sister is remarkable." Garrett nodded, pride evident in his expression. "She is. Gave up a comfortable life back east to come out here with me. Never complains even when things get hard." "May I ask why you came here?" "To Redemption Springs, I mean." He was quiet for so long that Harriet thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "We needed a fresh start, somewhere we could build something that was truly ours." He glanced at her. "I suspect you understand something about that." She did. After her parents died, leaving only debts and painful memories in the Ohio town where she'd grown up, Harriet had answered an advertisement for a teacher in the Wyoming Territory. It had been an escape as much as an opportunity. "Yes," she said simply, "I do." They rode in companionable silence for a while longer before Garrett spoke again. "Would you consider coming out to the ranch again, perhaps this Saturday? Hannah mentioned she'd like to show you her garden, and he hesitated. I'd enjoy your company." The directness of it, no pretense, no social maneuvering, took Harriet by surprise. "I would like that very much." As they reached her small house, Garrett helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, neither moving away. "Thank you for today," Harriet said softly. "My pleasure." His eyes held hers. "Until Saturday, then." "Until Saturday." As she watched him drive away, Harriet realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time since her humiliation in the street. Something had shifted today, though she couldn't quite name what it was. A new friendship, certainly, but perhaps also the beginning of something more. The week that followed brought changes to Harriet's routine. On Monday, she found a small package on her desk when she arrived at the schoolhouse, a book of poetry by Walt Whitman with a simple note. "Thought you might enjoy this, G.H." The gesture warmed her through the day, even when she overheard two mothers whispering about her as they dropped off their children. On Wednesday, Dr. Fuller stopped by the school during lunch recess. "I enjoyed our conversation on Sunday," he said after checking on a student with a persistent cough. "It's refreshing to discuss literature with someone who appreciates it. Would you consider helping me organize a small library for the town?" Nothing fancy, just a collection of books people could borrow. The project gave Harriet new purpose. By Friday, she had compiled a list of essential volumes and written letters to publishers back east inquiring about donations. When she shared her progress with Garrett during his unexpected visit to the schoolhouse that afternoon, his approval was evident. "You're bringing something valuable to this town," he said as he walked her home, carrying a stack of books she'd accumulated for the library project. "Something that will outlast all of us." Harriet glanced at him, surprised by the sentiment. "It's just a few books. It's more than that." He looked toward the distant mountains, thoughtful. "Out here, people focus on survival, food, shelter, safety. Those things matter, but so do ideas, beauty. The things that make life worth the struggle." The depth of his thinking constantly surprised her. Garrett Hayes was unlike any man she had met before, a rancher with the soul of a philosopher, a practical man who valued dreams. Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. Harriet woke with the dawn, taking extra care with her appearance. She chose her second-best dress, a sage green that complemented her brown eyes and honey-colored hair, and arranged her hair in a style that was neat but softer than her usual severe schoolteacher's bun. Garrett arrived precisely at 10, as promised. Something in his expression when he saw her made Harriet glad she'd taken such care with her appearance. "You look." He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "Radiant." The compliment, delivered without artifice, brought color to her cheeks. Thank you. The ride to Cross Creek was different today, just the two of them, with no Sunday dinner as their destination. Harriet found herself both nervous and exhilarated by the implications. Hannah met them at the ranch with obvious pleasure, immediately whisking Harriet away to show her the vegetable garden and fruit trees she'd planted. "We'll have our own orchard in a few years," she explained proudly, pointing out apple, cherry, and peach saplings. "Garrett thinks I'm overly optimistic about how many will survive, but I say the West was built on optimism." After the garden tour, Hannah conveniently remembered errands in town, leaving Harriet in Garrett's care. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" he asked, a slight uncertainty in his voice that Harriet found endearing. "I'd love to." He saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for Harriet and his own chestnut gelding, and led her away from the house, across meadows bright with wildflowers toward the creek that gave the ranch its name. "It's more beautiful than I imagined," Harriet said as they rode side by side. The landscape rolled before them, grasslands giving way to scattered stands of cottonwoods and willows along the creek, with mountains rising in the distance. "It was overgrazed when I bought it," Garrett explained. "Previous owner ran too many cattle on it, trying to make quick money. Land needs respect, time to recover. We're running half the herd size now, rotating pastures to let the grass come back. You're thinking of the future," he nodded. "What's the point otherwise?" "I didn't come out here just to strip the land and move on. I came to build something lasting." They stopped at the creek bank, dismounting to let the horses drink. Garrett spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, and they sat watching the water flow past, sparkling in the late morning sun. "May I ask you something personal?" Harriet said after a comfortable silence. "You can ask. I might not answer," he replied, but his smile took any sting from the words. "What brought you and Hannah to Wyoming? You mentioned needing a fresh start, but—" She hesitated. "I sense there's more to it than that." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, absently running his fingers through the grass beside the blanket. "We're from Virginia originally," he finally said. "Our family had a good farm there, not large but productive. Then the war came." The war between the states, of course, Harriet should have realized. "I was 17 when I enlisted in the Confederate Army," he continued, his voice even but with an undercurrent of old pain. "Too young to understand what I was fighting for, but old enough to kill and be killed. I survived. Our parents and younger brother didn't. Union soldiers burned our farm in '64. They were inside." "I'm so sorry," Harriet whispered, instinctively reaching for his hand. He accepted her touch, his large hand enveloping hers. "Hannah was at a neighbor's that day. She was 15. Afterward, we tried to rebuild, but there was too much death there, too many ghosts, too much hatred on all sides, so we came west in '70. Worked other people's land until we could afford our own, and now you have Cross Creek. Now we have Cross Creek." He looked at her, his expression softening. "What about you, Harriet Morgan? What ghosts are you running from?" The direct question caught her off guard. People in town had speculated about her background, of course, but no one had ever simply asked. "No dramatic war story," she said quietly. "Just the slow death of dreams. My father was a schoolteacher like me. He believed in education, in books, in ideas, but he was also a dreamer who never quite understood money. When he died 5 years ago, the debts nearly crushed my mother. She worked herself to death trying to pay them off, taking in washing and mending until her hands were raw. She stared at the creek, memories washing over her. After she passed, I sold everything to settle the remaining debts. There was an advertisement for a teacher in Wyoming Territory. It offered room, board, and a small salary. It seemed like Providence." "Was it Providence, I mean?" Harriet considered the question seriously. "I thought so at first, then I wasn't sure, especially after." She faltered, the humiliation in the street still raw. "After Wallace Bentley showed the worst of this town," Garrett finished for her. "Yes, but now." She looked at him, really looked at him, the strength in his weathered face, the kindness in his eyes, the steadiness that seemed to radiate from him. "Now I think perhaps it was Providence after all." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the connection that had been growing since he'd helped her from the mud. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Garrett leaned toward her. Harriet didn't move, her heart pounding as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief and tender, but it changed everything. When they drew apart, Harriet knew her life had reached a turning point. There would be before this moment and after, with no going back. "I'm not a man for playing games or courting for appearances' sake," Garrett said quietly. "I admire you, Harriet Morgan, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I'd like to court you properly if you're willing." The directness of it was startling and wonderful. No manipulation, no social maneuvering, just honest words from an honest man. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. His smile then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his serious face. He helped her to her feet, maintaining their connection by keeping her hand in his. "Then may I have the honor of escorting you to the Founders' Day dance next Saturday?" he asked formally, though his eyes twinkled. The Founders' Day celebration was Redemption Spring's biggest annual event, with people coming from miles around. To attend with Garrett would be a public declaration of their relationship and a direct challenge to the gossips who had delighted in her humiliation. "Yes," Harriet said, feeling braver than she had in years. "Yes, you may." As they rode back to the ranch house, side by side in comfortable silence, Harriet felt as though she were seeing the landscape through new eyes. The wildflowers seemed brighter, the grass greener, the sky a more perfect blue. It was foolish, she knew, this giddy lightness from one kiss and a promise of courtship. And yet, it felt more real than anything had in a very long time. Hannah was waiting on the porch when they returned, her knowing smile suggesting she had planned her convenient errands very deliberately. "Did you have a nice ride?" she asked innocently. "Very nice," Garrett replied, the corner of his mouth quirking up as he helped Harriet dismount. "Lovely," Harriet agreed, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks under Hannah's amused gaze. "Well, you're just in time for lunch," Hannah said, leading them inside. "Nothing fancy, just cold chicken and biscuits." Over the simple meal, they talked easily about books, ranching, and Hannah's plans for expanding her garden. The sense of belonging Harriet felt was almost overwhelming, this feeling of being accepted and valued simply for herself, without pretense or judgment. When it came time to return to town, Harriet found herself reluctant to leave. "Thank you for today," she said to Hannah as they embraced on the porch. "For everything." "You're good for him," Hannah replied softly. "I haven't seen him this alive in years." The ride back to town was filled with quiet conversation about practical things: the library project, the coming dance, the end of the school term, but underneath ran a current of connection that made even mundane topics feel significant. As they approached Redemption Springs, however, Harriet's anxiety returned. Being seen with Garrett would spark fresh gossip, she knew, not all of it kind. "Second thoughts?" Garrett asked perceptively as he felt her tension. "No," she said firmly, "just preparing myself." "We could take the back way to your house." The offer was tempting, but Harriet straightened her shoulders. "No, I'm not ashamed of being seen with you, Garrett Hayes. Quite the contrary." His smile was worth any gossip they might face. "Good. Because I'm mighty proud to be seen with you, Harriet Morgan." They rode down Main Street with their heads held high. It was late afternoon, and many townspeople were out enjoying the fine spring weather. Harriet saw the exact moment when Wallace Bentley spotted them from outside the saloon, his expression darkening. She saw Mrs. Pratchett, the general store owner's wife and chief town gossip, nudge her friend and point. She saw the school board president, Mr. Hollister, raise his eyebrows in surprise. But she also saw Dr. Fuller tip his hat respectfully to them both. She saw Mrs. Wilson from the neighboring ranch wave cheerfully from the millinery shop, and most surprisingly, she saw several of her students break into wide grins and wave enthusiastically. "Miss Morgan's got a beau." Young Billy Jenkins called out, earning a swat from his mother but causing Garrett to chuckle. "Seems I've been identified," he said, raising his hat briefly to the boy. "You don't mind?" Harriet asked, still marveling at his calm in the face of public scrutiny. "Mind being known as the man courting the prettiest and smartest woman in the territory?" He shook his head. "Can't say that I do. When they reached her house, Garrett helped her down from the wagon and walked her to her door. Unlike their parting at the creek, this time he simply raised her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both proper for public view and deeply meaningful to them both. "Until the dance, then," he said. "Until then," she agreed, reluctant to release his hand. As she watched him drive away, Harriet knew that returning his duster after her humiliation had been the first step on a path she could never have imagined. Somehow, in helping her up from the mud, Garrett Hayes had also begun to heal something deeper, the loneliness and doubt she had carried for too long. The week before the Founders' Day dance passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Harriet splurged on fabric for a new dress, using her small savings to purchase a rich burgundy material that the shopkeeper's wife assured her was the very latest fashion from Denver. In the evenings, she sewed by lamplight, creating a gown more elegant than anything she had owned before. Garrett visited her twice during the week, once bringing books for the library project and staying for tea on her porch, and once appearing unexpectedly at the schoolhouse with a bouquet of wildflowers, just because. Each visit strengthened the connection between them, conversations flowing easily from literature to ranching to their hopes for the future. The morning of the dance dawned clear and warm. Harriet woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent the day preparing. She washed her hair with her precious store of lavender soap, then carefully arranged it in an elegant style with soft curls framing her face. The new dress fit perfectly, the rich color bringing warmth to her complexion and highlighting the golden strands in her brown hair. When Garrett arrived at 7, his appreciative gaze told her the effort had been worthwhile. He too had dressed with care, a new black coat over a crisp white shirt, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering her another small bouquet, this time roses clearly purchased from Mrs. Wilson's greenhouse rather than wildflowers from the prairie. "Thank you," Harriet replied, feeling truly beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life. "You look quite handsome yourself." The town hall was decorated with bunting and paper lanterns for the Founders' Day celebration. As Garrett helped Harriet from the wagon, she was acutely aware of the attention they drew. Unlike the day of her humiliation, however, she now had his solid presence beside her, his hand warm at the small of her back as they entered the hall. The music was already playing, a lively reel performed by local musicians. Couples danced in the center of the room while others gathered around the edges, talking and enjoying the refreshments that had been laid out on long tables. "Miss Morgan, Mr. Hayes," Hannah called, approaching them with a wide smile. She wore a pretty blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair was arranged more elaborately than Harriet had seen before. "Isn't it wonderful? Louis and Alina are here too, and Dr. Fuller promised to save me a dance." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Harriet found herself relaxing despite the curious stares directed their way. When Garrett led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, she followed without hesitation, her hand resting comfortably in his. "You dance very well," she said, surprised by his grace given his usual practical manner. "My mother insisted we learn," he replied, guiding her smoothly through the turns. "Said no child of hers would shame the family name by clomping around a dance floor like a draft horse." Harriet laughed, the sound drawing even more attention from those around them. She realized suddenly that many in the town had rarely, if ever, heard her laugh. The serious schoolmarm, always proper and composed, had kept too much of herself hidden away. As the evening progressed, Harriet's anxiety faded. Yes, there were whispers and curious glances, but there was also genuine warmth from many. Hannah introduced her to friends she'd made in town. Dr. Fuller engaged her in a lively discussion about the library project, promising support from the town council. Even Mr. Hollister, the school board president, made a point of telling her how much they valued her contribution to the community. "You've changed things, you know," Garrett said quietly as they stepped outside for a breath of fresh air between dances. The night was mild, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. "What do you mean? Look around you." He gestured to where Hannah was laughing with Alina Rodriguez, where Louis was teaching some of Harriet's students a traditional Mexican dance, where townspeople who normally kept to their separate circles were mingling freely. This is what community should be. Not divided by where people came from or how much money they have, but united by where they're going together. Harriet considered his words. I think you give me too much credit. I don't think I give you enough. His eyes were serious in the lantern light. You've stood your ground with dignity even when it was hard. People respect that whether they admit it or not. Before she could respond, a familiar and unwelcome voice interrupted them. Well, the schoolmarm and the rancher, isn't this cozy? Wallace Bentley stood a few feet away, his usual smug expression made worse by the effects of too much whiskey. He had clearly come from the saloon rather than the dance itself, his clothes rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. Good evening, mister. Bentley, Harriet said coolly, determined not to let him ruin the night. Bentley, Garrett acknowledged with a slight nod, his posture relaxed but alert. Gotta say, Hayes, you surprise me, Wallace continued, swaying slightly, picking up damaged goods. Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers out here. Garrett's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Harriet placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Bentley, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air, I understand that a man in your position might feel threatened by those who earn respect through character rather than inheritance. But I assure you, your opinions matter very little to either of us. Wallace's face flushed with anger. You uppity little, I believe the lady has made her point, Garrett interrupted, his tone deceptively mild but with steel beneath. Now, I suggest you return to whatever bottle you crawled out of and leave decent folk to their celebrating. For a moment it seemed Wallace might lunge at them, then, abruptly, the fight seemed to drain out of him. You deserve each other, he muttered, turning away. Self-righteous foreigners thinking you belong here. As he staggered back toward the saloon, Harriet released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm sorry, she said. He's been a problem since I arrived in town. His father is on the school board, so I've tried to handle him diplomatically. You handled him perfectly just now, Garrett said, admiration clear in his voice. Though I admit, I was tempted to be considerably less diplomatic. Violence wouldn't have helped, Harriet said, though she was touched by his protective instinct. Probably not, he agreed. But it might have been satisfying. His wry tone made her laugh despite the tension of the moment. Shall we go back inside? I believe you promised me another dance. As they rejoined the celebration, Harriet was aware of curious glances from those who had witnessed the exchange with Wallace. But rather than judgment, she saw something new in many eyes' respect. She had stood her ground with dignity against the town bully, and she had done it without lowering herself to his level. The remainder of the evening passed in a happy blur. Harriet danced not only with Garrett but also with Dr. Fuller, Louis Rodriguez, and even old Mr. Wilson, who told her he hadn't taken to the dance floor in years but couldn't resist when the prettiest teacher in the territory was available. As midnight approached, Garrett found her by the refreshment table where she was speaking with Hannah and Alina about plans for a quilting circle. May I steal you away for a moment? He asked, offering his arm. Harriet excused herself from the women, accepting his arm with a curious smile. What are you plotting, Mr. Hayes? Nothing sinister, he assured her, leading her once again outside. This time he guided her away from the hall to a small garden beside the church, where a bench sat beneath a flowering apple tree. The music from the dance was still audible but muted, and they had privacy from curious eyes. It's lovely here, Harriet said, looking up at the stars visible through the apple blossoms. I wanted to speak with you alone, Garrett said, suddenly serious, about the future. Harriet's heart quickened. What about it? He took both her hands in his expression earnest in the soft light filtering from the distant lanterns. I know we've known each other only a short time, some might say too short, but I've lived enough to recognize what matters when I find it. He paused, searching her face. I'm not a wealthy man, Harriet. Cross Creek is a good property, but it will take years of hard work to make it truly prosperous. I can't offer you luxury or an easy life. I've never wanted luxury, she said softly. What I can offer is this: honesty, respect, partnership, a home built on mutual regard. My word that I will stand beside you, work with you, face whatever comes with you." His hands tightened gently around hers. "If you need more time, I understand, but I wanted you to know my intentions clearly." Harriet looked at this man who had lifted her from the mud both literally and figuratively, who had seen her worth when others mocked, who had defended her honor without diminishing her strength, who spoke to her as an equal and valued her mind as much as her heart. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "I know my own heart, Garrett Hayes, and it belongs with you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but his kiss, tender yet passionate, respectful yet claiming, sealed the promise between them. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you'll marry me, Harriet Morgan?" She laughed, the sound pure happiness. "Yes, yes, it does." They returned to the dance hand in hand, both aware that this night marked not just the founding of a town but the beginning of their shared future. When they announced their engagement to Hannah, her delighted embrace and tears told Harriet she was truly gaining not just a husband but a sister. As word spread through the hall, Harriet was touched by the genuine congratulations that came their way. Dr. Fuller raised a toast. The Rodriguez family enveloped them both in warm embraces. Even Mr. Hollister offered his blessing, along with an assurance that Harriet's teaching position would remain hers for as long as she wished to continue after marriage, a progressive stance that surprised and pleased her. By the time they left the dance, the stars were fading and dawn was approaching. Garrett drove Harriet home through the quiet streets, both tired but too happy for sleep. "When?" he asked as they reached her porch. "When will you marry me?" Harriet considered. The school term would end in a month. It would take time to prepare to adjust her life to this new reality. "August," she decided, "when the wildflowers are at their peak on the range." "August," he agreed, sealing the decision with another kiss. As Harriet watched him drive away, the first light of dawn touching the eastern sky, she marveled at how completely her life had changed in the span of 2 weeks. From public humiliation to public celebration, from loneliness to belonging, from uncertainty to purpose. All because a kind man had offered his hand when she was down, and in doing so had helped her find not just her feet, but her heart. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of preparation and adjustment. Harriet completed the school term with a renewed sense of purpose, finding that her engagement had somehow elevated rather than diminished her standing in the community. The same parents who had once whispered about her unmarried status now sought her advice about their children's education, often adding congratulations on her upcoming marriage. Wallace Bentley had left town shortly after the Founders' Day dance, sent by his father to Denver on business that everyone understood was really an attempt to avoid further embarrassment. His absence made Redemption Springs a more pleasant place for everyone, especially Harriet. In June, Hannah and Alina organized a wedding shower that brought together women from town and surrounding ranches. Harriet was touched by the thoughtful gifts, practical items for her new life at Cross Creek, but also beautiful things. A handmade quilt from the newly formed quilting circle, embroidered linens, a set of leather-bound books from Dr. Fuller. "You've made quite an impression here," Hannah told her as they sorted through the gifts afterward. "These aren't just obligatory presents. People genuinely care about you, about both of you." July brought the challenge of packing up Harriet's small house and deciding what to bring to Cross Creek. Garrett insisted she bring everything that mattered to her. "The house is as much yours as mine now," he said as they sorted through her books together one evening. "I want you to make it your home, not feel like a visitor." "What about my piano?" Harriet asked hesitantly, running her hand over the small upright that had been her mother's. It was one of the few valuable items she'd brought from Ohio, shipped at considerable expense. "It's rather large." "We'll make room," Garrett said without hesitation. "Hannah plays a little and I'd like to hear you play. Besides," he added with a smile, "someday we might have children who would benefit from music lessons." The casual mention of children sent a warm flush through Harriet. They had spoken of the future in general terms, but this specific vision children at Cross Creek, learning music and literature alongside ranching and riding felt suddenly, vividly real. August arrived with perfect weather, as if nature itself approved of their union. The wedding was set for the 15th, to be held at Cross Creek rather than in town. Reverend Thomas from the Redemption Springs Church would perform the ceremony, but Harriet and Garrett had decided on an outdoor service overlooking the creek, where wildflowers carpeted the meadow in purple, yellow, and white. The day before the wedding, Harriet moved the last of her belongings to the ranch. Her piano had already been carefully transported and installed in the parlor, where Hannah had rearranged furniture to accommodate it. The three of them had dinner together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "Tomorrow at this time you'll be Mrs. Hayes," Hannah said, squeezing Harriet's hand affectionately. "Mrs. Harriet Hayes." Harriet tried the name aloud, finding she liked the sound of it. "Though I'll still be Miss Morgan at school, at least for now." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Having second thoughts about teaching after we're married, not at all," Harriet assured him. "But the children are used to Miss Morgan, and eventually—" She hesitated, still shy about discussing their future family despite Garrett's earlier mention. "Eventually we might have reasons for you to stay closer to home," he finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "But there's no rush, Harriet. We have time to build our life as we choose." That night, in what would be her last evening as an unmarried woman, Harriet sat alone on the porch of the small guest cabin where she would stay until the wedding. The main house was visible across the yard, lamplight glowing in the windows. Tomorrow she would cross the threshold of that house as Garrett's wife, beginning a new chapter in a story she could never have imagined when she first came to Redemption Springs. She thought about the young woman who had arrived on the stagecoach 2 years ago, hopeful but wounded, determined but afraid. How different she felt now, stronger not just because of Garrett's love but because of her own growth. The humiliation that had once seemed devastating now felt like a turning point, the moment when she had stopped merely existing in Redemption Springs and started truly living. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Hannah arrived at the cabin early to help Harriet prepare, bringing breakfast and calm reassurance for the nervousness that had suddenly gripped the bride. "It's normal to be anxious," Hannah said as she helped Harriet arrange her hair. "I remember our mother saying she was so nervous on her wedding day that she nearly fainted during the ceremony, but the moment she looked into our father's eyes, everything else fell away." "Were they happy?" Harriet asked, curious about the family that had shaped Garrett and Hannah. "Deeply," Hannah said, her eyes soft with memory. "They disagreed. Sometimes mother was more refined, father more practical, but they respected each other. That's what I see between you and Garrett, respect. It's the foundation of everything else." Harriet's wedding dress was simple but beautiful ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the most expensive garment she had ever owned. When she was finally ready, Hannah stepped back to admire her. "You look radiant," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "Garrett won't be able to speak when he sees you." "I'm not sure I'll be able to speak either," Harriet admitted, her own eyes damp. By noon, guests had begun to arrive at Cross Creek. Chairs had been arranged in the meadow overlooking the creek, with an arbor of wildflowers marking the spot where the vows would be exchanged. Harriet watched from the cabin window as wagons and riders approached from town and neighboring ranches. At 1 o'clock, Dr. Fuller arrived to escort her to the ceremony. With no father to give her away, Harriet had asked the doctor, who had become a trusted friend and ally, to perform the role. "You look beautiful, my dear," he said, offering his arm, "ready to begin your new life." "More than ready," Harriet replied, her nervousness giving way to certainty as they walked toward the gathering. The guests rose as she approached, but Harriet had eyes only for Garrett, waiting beneath the flower-covered arbor. He wore a new black suit with a white shirt and string tie, his sandy hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. But it was his expression that caught her heart, a look of such wonder and love that it seemed to illuminate him from within. Reverend Thomas kept the ceremony simple and meaningful, speaking of partnership, respect, and love enduring through life's challenges. When it came time for the vows, Garrett's voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Harriet's as he promised to cherish and honor her all the days of his life. When Harriet spoke her own vows, she was surprised by the strength in her voice, the absolute certainty she felt as she pledged herself to this man who had seen her true worth and helped her reclaim her dignity. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Garrett's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, appropriate for the public setting yet conveying the depth of his feelings. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, the applause that greeted them felt like a blessing, the community affirming not just their union but their place within it. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and food prepared by Hannah, Elena, and several women from town. There was music, Louis and Miguel playing guitar, and later, at guests' insistence, Harriet playing the piano that had been moved onto the porch for the occasion. As afternoon mellowed into evening, lanterns were lit around the yard, creating pools of golden light as people continued to celebrate. Harriet found a moment of quiet with Garrett, the two of them standing a little apart watching their guests. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she answered, leaning against him. "It's strange to think how differently things might have turned out." "How so?" "If Wallace hadn't humiliated me that day, if you hadn't been there to help me, if I'd been too proud to accept your help." She shook her head. "So many small moments that led us here." "I would have found my way to you somehow," Garrett said with quiet conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Harriet. I believe that." As the last guests departed and night fully claimed the sky, Harriet and Garrett stood on the porch of their home, truly theirs now, shared completely. Hannah had tactfully announced she would be staying with Elena and Louis for a few days to give the newlyweds some privacy, leaving them alone in the house for the first time. Hand in hand, they walked inside, closing the door on the world outside. The house was quiet, lit only by a few lamps Hannah had left burning. On the kitchen table sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses with a note, "To new beginnings, all my love, Hannah." "Your sister thinks of everything," Harriet said as Garrett poured the wine. "She's been planning this day since you first came to dinner," he admitted with a smile. "I think she knew before either of us what was happening between us." They took their glasses to the parlor, where Harriet's piano now stood in the corner, sheet music arranged neatly on the rack. The furniture had been rearranged to make space for it, but rather than looking out of place, it seemed to complete the room. "Play something for me," Garrett asked, settling onto the sofa. Harriet set down her wine and moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys before beginning a gentle melody, a love song her mother had taught her long ago. As she played, she felt Garrett's presence behind her, then his hands on her shoulders, a touch both comforting and thrilling. When the song ended, she turned on the bench to face him, looking up into eyes that held the future she had once feared she would never find. "Welcome home, Harriet Hayes," he said softly, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with meaning as she reached up to touch his face. "Yes, I am home." His kiss was different now, no audience to consider, no proprieties to maintain. Just 2 people who had pledged their lives to each other, beginning the private journey of marriage in a house that would witness their joys and sorrows, their challenges and triumphs, their love growing deeper with each passing day. Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, Harriet lay in Garrett's arms, listening to his steady breathing and the night sounds of the ranch. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, from Ohio to Wyoming, from grief to joy, from humiliation to honor. She had come to the West seeking escape and survival. She had found purpose and love. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with this good man beside her, both of them stronger together than they had ever been apart. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound haunting but beautiful in the vast Wyoming night. Harriet smiled in the darkness, feeling connected to this wild land that had become her home, this place where a woman could fall in mud and rise again with dignity, where a kind hand could offer help without diminishing independence, where two people could build something lasting on a foundation of mutual respect. She was Harriet Hayes now, teacher, wife, and whatever else the future might make her. The thought filled her with peaceful certainty as she drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that her journey, once solitary, would continue with loving companionship through all the days to come. The seasons changed, and with them, Harriet and Garrett's life together took deeper root at Cross Creek Ranch. Their first autumn as husband and wife brought the harvest garden vegetables, the first small yield from Hannah's young orchard, and the roundup of cattle for market. Harriet continued teaching in town, riding to and from the schoolhouse each day on the gentle mare Garrett had given her as a wedding gift. Their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings began early, with Harriet and Garrett sharing coffee on the porch when weather permitted, discussing the day ahead. She would prepare for school while he consulted with Lewis about ranch work. Evenings were for shared meals, often with Hannah and sometimes the Rodriguez family, followed by quiet hours in the parlor where Harriet might read aloud or play the piano while Garrett listened, his day's fatigue easing under the influence of music and companionship. Winter brought heavy snows that sometimes kept Harriet at home, the trail to town too dangerous to navigate. On those days, she worked on plans for the town library, which had become a reality thanks to Dr. Fuller's advocacy with the town council and donations from several Eastern publishers. The small building next to the church now housed 300 volumes, with Harriet serving as volunteer librarian on Saturdays. "You've brought culture to Redemption Springs," Garrett told her one evening as they sorted through a new shipment of books by lamplight. "People who have never read anything but the Bible now come asking for Dickens and Twain. Books change lives," Harriet replied, running her fingers over a leather-bound copy of Little Women. "They saved mine after my parents died. They showed me there was a bigger world, different possibilities." "Like teaching in Wyoming," he smiled, pulling her close. "Like marrying a rancher with philosophical tendencies," she countered, returning his smile. "Who would have thought?" With spring came new life to Cross Creek, calves in the pastures, seedlings in the garden, and most precious of all, the news that Harriet was expecting their first child. "Are you certain?" Garrett asked when she told him, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. "As certain as one can be," she answered, placing his hand on her still flat abdomen. "Dr. Fuller confirmed it yesterday. We'll have a child by late November." Garrett's joy was tempered with worry for her health, especially when morning sickness left her pale and weak through April and May. He insisted she reduce her teaching hours, hiring a young woman from town to assist with the younger children so Harriet could focus on the older students and conserve her strength. Hannah proved an invaluable support, taking over household duties without being asked and defending Harriet's need for rest when Garrett's protective instincts became overbearing. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded her brother when he fretted over Harriet's insistence on continuing to teach through the spring term. "And our Harriet is stronger than she looks." By summer, the sickness had passed, and Harriet bloomed with her pregnancy. The subtle rounding of her figure brought a new dimension to her beauty that left Garrett almost reverent in his attentions. He built a cradle with his own hands, working late into the evening after ranch chores were complete, carefully sanding each piece until it was satin smooth. In July, they celebrated their first anniversary with a small gathering similar to their wedding, though more intimate. Dr. Fuller proposed a toast to the expectant parents, his affection for them both evident in his words. "To Garrett and Harriet Hayes," he said, raising his glass, "who have shown us that love can grow in the most unexpected circumstances, and that true partnership multiplies joy and divides sorrow." As summer waned and Harriet's pregnancy advanced, she reluctantly agreed to take a leave from teaching when the fall term began. The school board, far from objecting, assured her that her position would be waiting whenever she was ready to return. "You've set a standard here," Mr. Hollister told her. "The children respect you and the parents see the difference you've made. Take the time you need with your family." September brought cooler weather and increasing anticipation at Cross Creek. Hannah transformed the small bedroom adjacent to the master into a nursery, decorating it with handmade curtains and a colorful quilt contributed by the women of the quilting circle. "It needs to be cheerful," she explained when Garrett questioned the bright colors. "Babies respond to beauty from the very beginning." October found Harriet nesting in earnest, organizing and reorganizing the nursery, reviewing her collection of children's books to determine which would be read first, and spending hours at the piano playing lullabies, convinced that the baby could hear and would recognize the melodies after birth. As her due date approached, Harriet felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation. Though Alina Rodriguez had assured her that childbirth, while difficult, was manageable with proper support and Dr. Fuller had promised to attend her when the time came, the isolation of the ranch during November's unpredictable weather remained a concern. "Perhaps I should stay in town for the last few weeks," she suggested to Garrett one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on her rounded abdomen. "I could stay with Mrs. Wilson. She's offered, and it would ensure Dr. Fuller could reach me quickly." Garrett's reluctance was evident in his expression. "I want you here," he admitted, "but your safety and the baby's come first if you think it's best." In the end, the decision was made for them. 3 weeks before Harriet's expected due date, she woke in the night to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking, followed shortly by the first contractions. "It's too early," she gasped as Garrett lit the lamp beside their bed. "The baby has its own ideas," he said, his calm voice belying the fear in his eyes. "I'll send Miguel for Dr. Fuller." The birth was long and difficult. Dr. Fuller arrived just as dawn broke, bringing his nurse, Mrs. Patterson. Hannah kept water boiling and clean linens ready while Garrett paced the parlor, each of Harriet's cries cutting through him like a physical blow. When the baby finally arrived, a daughter, small but perfect, the household exhaled a collective breath of relief. Dr. Fuller pronounced both mother and child healthy despite the early arrival. "She's impatient like her mother," he said with a smile as he placed the swaddled infant in Harriet's arms, "but she's strong." Harriet looked down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so immense it seemed impossible to contain. When Garrett entered the room, his face drawn with worry until he saw them both safe, she felt her heart expand even further. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. He approached the bed hesitantly, almost reverently, sinking down beside them and reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with one calloused finger. "She's so small," he whispered, "but mighty," Harriet assured him. "Feel how tightly she holds my finger." As if to prove her point, the infant grasped Garrett's finger when he offered it, her tiny hand barely encircling the tip. "What shall we call her?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Harriet had been considering names for months, but in this moment, looking at their daughter's delicate features and sensing the strength that had brought her safely into the world, she knew. "Grace," she said. "Grace Elizabeth Hayes." "Grace," Garrett repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." Hannah entered quietly, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "She's beautiful," she said, joining them beside the bed. "Hello, little Grace. Welcome to Cross Creek." The first weeks with Grace were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Harriet, recovered quickly from the birth, found herself constantly marveling at the miracle they had created, this perfect blend of herself and Garrett, with his nose and her chin, tiny fingers that already showed signs of her long ones, a temperament that seemed to combine his patience with her determination. As winter settled over Cross Creek, the Hayes family established new routines around Grace's needs. Harriet discovered that the lullabies she had played during pregnancy did indeed soothe the infant, especially when she was fussy in the evenings. Garrett proved an attentive father, as comfortable changing diapers as he was managing ranch hands, often taking Grace in a sling against his chest while he worked on indoor tasks so Harriet could rest. Christmas that year was especially meaningful. They decorated a small pine tree cut from their own land and exchanged simple gifts books for Harriet, a new saddle for Garrett, handmade toys for Grace. Dr. Fuller joined them for Christmas dinner, bringing news from town and a tiny silver rattle for his favorite patient. "Redemption Springs is changing," he told them as they sat around the fire after the meal, Grace sleeping peacefully in Harriet's arms. "The railroad spur will reach us by spring. There's talk of a real hotel, not just rooms above the saloon. Progress is coming, whether old-timers like Bentley approve or not." "Speaking of Bentley," Hannah said, "did you hear his son is engaged to a banker's daughter from Denver? Apparently she has no idea about his character." "Perhaps he's changed," Harriet suggested, always willing to believe in redemption. "People can surprise you." "Some can," Dr. Fuller agreed with a skeptical smile, "though I'll believe it when I see it in Wallace's case." As winter gave way to spring, Harriet began considering her return to teaching. Grace was thriving, now 6 months old and full of curiosity about the world around her. The question was how to balance motherhood with her professional calling. What if I taught part-time? She suggested to Garrett as they walked along the creek one April afternoon, Grace babbling happily from her perch on her father's shoulders. "Mornings only, perhaps 3 days a week. Hannah has offered to watch Grace and I could bring her with me sometimes." Garrett considered this. "If it's what you want, we'll make it work," he said finally. "I've seen how you light up when you talk about your students. I wouldn't ask you to give that up entirely. And I wouldn't want to miss too much of Grace's childhood," Harriet admitted. "Perhaps this is the best compromise." The school board readily agreed to her proposal. By May, Harriet was back in the classroom 3 mornings a week, with Grace either at home with Hannah or in a small crib in the corner of the schoolroom, where older students took turns entertaining her during breaks. Life settled into a new pattern different from before Grace's birth, but no less satisfying. Harriet found that motherhood had deepened rather than diminished her teaching, giving her new insight into her students' needs and capabilities. And her professional life continued to enrich her role as a mother, providing intellectual stimulation that made her more patient and creative at home. Grace's first birthday in November was celebrated with a small party at Cross Creek. Dr. Fuller came, as did the Rodriguez family and several friends from town. The baby, now walking with assistance and attempting simple words, was the center of attention, especially when she decisively smashed her piece of birthday cake and offered sticky handfuls to everyone nearby. "She has your generous spirit," Garrett told Harriet as they cleaned cake from their daughter's face and hands. "And your determination," Harriet countered, laughing as Grace immediately reached for another piece. As they prepared for their second Christmas as parents, Harriet reflected on how completely her life had transformed in the 3.5 years since she had arrived in Redemption Springs. From a lonely, uncertain young woman seeking merely to survive, she had become a respected teacher, a beloved wife, a mother, a valued member of the community. The humiliation that had once seemed so devastating now felt like a distant memory, significant only because it had led her to Garrett. On Christmas Eve, after Grace was asleep in her crib, Harriet and Garrett sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching stars emerge in the clear night sky. "I have something for you," Garrett said, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately before tomorrow's celebrations." He handed her a small package wrapped in plain paper. Inside, Harriet found a locket on a delicate gold chain. When she opened it, she saw a tiny photograph of Grace on one side and Garrett on the other. "It's beautiful," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "There's an inscription," he said, indicating the back of the locket. In small, elegant script were the words, "To Harriet, who found strength in adversity and taught me the meaning of grace, with all my love, G." "Oh, Garrett," she whispered, deeply moved. He took her hand, his expression serious in the starlight. "I've been thinking about that day we met you in the mud, me offering my coat. How different things might have been if Wallace Bentley hadn't been such a fool, or if I hadn't happened to be crossing the street at that moment. Providence, Harriet said, echoing what she had told him on their wedding day. Perhaps, he agreed. Or perhaps just the natural consequence of who we are. You, too proud to stay down when life knocks you over. Me, unable to ignore someone in need of help. He squeezed her hand gently. What I'm trying to say, Harriet Hayes, is that I fall more in love with you each day. Not just because you're beautiful though you are or because you've given me a daughter precious as she is, but because of who you are at your core, your strength, your compassion. Your unwavering belief that books can change lives and that every child deserves an education and that people can be better than they sometimes appear. Harriet felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. And I love you for seeing those things in me, even when I couldn't see them myself. For lifting me up, not just from the mud that day, but every day since, with your steadiness and your faith in me. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars and thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment, this Christmas Eve on a ranch in Wyoming, with their daughter sleeping peacefully inside and the future stretching before them, full of promise. What do you think the new year will bring? Harriet asked finally. Garrett considered the question. More changes for Redemption Springs with the railroad coming, more growth for Cross Creek. I'm thinking of expanding the herd if the spring calving goes well, more words and steps for Grace. He paused, looking at her with a smile. Perhaps another child if you're willing. Harriet returned his smile, thinking of the secret she had been saving for Christmas morning, the knowledge, confirmed by Dr. Fuller just days ago, that their family would indeed be growing again by late summer. I think the new year will bring all sorts of wonderful surprises, she said, leaning against his shoulder and closing her eyes in contentment. But whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, Garrett agreed, his arm tightening around her, always together. As they sat beneath the vast Wyoming sky, Harriet thought of the young woman who had once stood humiliated in Redemption Springs Main Street, mud splattered and despairing. How could she have known that from that lowest moment would come such joy? That a stranger's kindness would lead to such profound love? That a single act of decency would change not just her life, but an entire community? The mysteries of life and love were as vast as the star-filled sky above them. But of one thing Harriet was absolutely certain. No matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, she would meet them with courage, with grace, and with the unwavering support of the man beside her, the cowboy who had lifted her spirit and her heart, and in doing so, had helped her find her true place in the world.